Right. Hello. So we move on now to the third section of chapter 3. And in this particular video, I will be talking about Monique Wittig, and I shall also be talking about Mary Douglas, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. Okay, so Monique Wittig talks about the way in which the lesbian is not a woman. This is something that I've already discussed in, I think, when we were doing a summary of chapter 1. How the lesbian is not a woman because a woman is defined in relation to a man. So, what happens to somebody who does not want to be or does not feel the necessity to be in a relationship with a man? Then, what happens to her identity? She also says that she says that a woman is not only is a lesbian not a woman, but a lesbian also doesn't have sex. The lesbian body is not a sexed body in the sense that the sexed body is also the feminine body because sex is feminine. And we already know why she's saying that, because of course the idea is that the male body is the unsexed body, the ungendered body, the human body. So therefore the female body becomes the sexed body, and if you are opting out of the whole male female binary, then yours is not a sexed and gendered body either. Monique Wittig also talks about the way in which language can be patriarchal. She says definitely that in alignment with Foucault, she says that language creates the categories of men and women. These are political categories. And language also decides what is intelligible and what is not. So what I can understand and what I can't understand, that is also very much decided by language. That is something that we should be aware of. Many of us are familiar with Gayatri Chakraborty's Spivak. Many of us are aware of her essay, Can the Subaltern Speak? Now, this particular essay, Can the Subaltern Speak? This was a speech which was delivered in 1983. But 3 years before that, in 1980, Monique Wittig was already saying that the woman, the lesbian, the gay man, they cannot speak. So 3 years before Gayatri Spivak, Monique Wittig had already said that due to the way in which language functions, the woman, the lesbian, and the gay man cannot speak. So what does Monique Wittig do? She advocates an overthrow of grammar and the overthrow of the way in which gender functions in grammar. She writes a novel called Les Guerrières, and in this particular novel, she replaces il with elle. Now let me explain this. Il, I-L-S, il, means a group of people. Yes, they. But this group of people is, it can be a mixed group, so there can be men and women in the group. If there are men and women in the group, it is going to be il. If there is only men in the group, it will still be il. Notice this. But if there are only women in the group, then it will be elle. So therefore, il, they, the masculine they in French language, functions also as a gender neutral they. But the elle, the feminine plural they, functions as feminine. So when Monique Wittig writes the novel Les Guerrières, she is basically using elle, the female they, to designate the neutral they. So that is what she does. And by doing that, she is basically talking about some kind of a lesbian reverse discourse to the globalizing heterosexist episteme. Now, Wittig believes in a radical departure from the heterosexist regime. And this is where Judith Butler raises a question, and she says that this purification of heterosexuality is a kind of lesbian modernism. She actually calls it that. She says this is a lesbian modernism, and she says that it doesn't understand that participation in heterosexuality need not always be its consolidation. This is also something that we have discussed in a previous discussion, that just because I am using heterosexuality does not mean that I'm supporting it. We are going to see a very concrete example of that Judith Butler quotes in this particular section. She talks about a restaurant, and for a time, this gay restaurant, I don't know how, well, it's called a gay restaurant because I think presumably this has got an overwhelmingly gay clientele. Gay men usually used to eat at that restaurant. Now, the important thing is that for a short period of time, the restaurant has to close. Now, this is the notice that the restaurant put out, or the owners of the restaurant put out. According to the notice, the restaurant is closing for some time because she is overworked and needs rest. She. So the restaurant is actually being given a feminine pronoun, whereas technically the restaurant should have had a neutral pronoun, it. So when this restaurant is being given a feminine pronoun, do you realize that what is happening is that although the feminine pronoun seems to be heteropatriarchal, but because it is being disengaged, because it is being separated from the female body, it isn't remaining heteropatriarchal anymore. It's becoming a floating signifier. It's being set free, as it were. So moving on to the fourth section, this is where Judith Butler talks about how bodies are constructed. And she says that bodies are constructed through where it can go and where it cannot go. So bodies are constructed through prescriptions on its mobility, prescriptions on its actions, what it can do, what it cannot do, where it can go, where it cannot go. And in this particular section, Judith Butler uses the work of Mary Douglas. Now, Mary Douglas produced a very important book called Purity and Danger in 1966, in which she is basically showing how the body is created by imposing limits on it. So an acceptable good body then is the body that is created by imposing a set of limits on it. Yes, and so therefore within the behavioral boundaries it becomes a good body. Butler reads Mary Douglas's notion of untidiness as cultural unruliness and disorder. And this kind of cultural uneasiness, unruliness and disorder is something that happens, when you play with language, when you're using language in a way in which it is not meant to be used patriarchally. And she also uses Simon Watney's work, Policing Desire, AIDS, Pornography and the Media, also to talk about the way in which the body of the homosexual is regarded as being primarily an unruly body. And it is an unruly body because AIDS was regarded as something that was transmitted through bodily fluids. And any kind of fluidity is something that patriarchy finds very, very threatening. So therefore, the whole idea that gay men can sleep around, this whole idea of sleeping around was very troubling to patriarchy, because patriarchy is desperate to sort of discipline our sexual lives, hence marriage. So the fact that gay men were leading such indisciplined lives clearly becomes a matter of grave concern to patriarchy, and the fact that AIDS appears is something that patriarchy jumps at and says, aha, see, this is what happens. If you don't listen to me, you're going to fall sick and you're going to die. So therefore there is a way in which the body is regarded as a body as long as a proper body, as long as it functions within the stable boundaries set down for it. In the next next and last video, we shall be talking about Julia Kristeva, but this in a good way, and we'll be talking about Esther Newton's work, Mother Camp. So that will be the third and last video of chapter 3, and indeed the last video that will be discussing Judith Butler's Gender Trouble.